Hi, RJ here, and I've got another video in my series on the Lee Loadmaster Progressive Press Priming System. I wanted to show the differences between the new Gen 3 Plus primer assembly versus the standard Gen 3. Gen 3 Plus is a modification that Lee made in the first or second week of November to remedy some ongoing issues that they were continuing to have with the Gen 3 priming system. So I'll go over my observations of what the differences are between the Gen 3 Plus and the Gen 3. The way to tell right away, immediately, whether or not you have a Gen 3 Plus versus a Gen 3 is there's a small hole on the carrier, or in the trough assembly, not the carrier, right here. I've got, reorient my tool. There's a depression. It's not a through hole, it's just drilled in a small diameter pinhole right in this area on the primer trough assembly itself. The standard Gen 3 doesn't have that. Maybe you can get a better idea. You can see right there. See that hole? So there you go. That's how you can immediately identify whether or not you have a Gen 3 Plus versus a standard Gen 3. For all intents and purposes, it looks identical in every other way. As far as the trough goes, they're the same. No distinct differences. The hole where the pin and the primer are exposed is essentially the same on these two. You can see there. The trough itself is identical. What's different is the slider. So let's take a look at how Lee has modified the slider. Let's see, make sure I get these. Okay, so here's the sliders. In my right hand, or on the right, is the new Gen 3 Plus slider, and in the left is the Gen 3. A very subtle change in the very tip of the slider. The hole is probably a little more captive in the Gen 3 Plus. In other words, there may be a tendency, it's hard to tell. It really is. The tip of the slider is really the only real distinctive change that I see in this design change, and it's still not really clear to me what this change was done for. The divots, the pads, the grooves, everything else is the same. Let's go ahead and mount this in the trough assembly here and try to get an idea of how this actually behaves. We'll slide a few primers down in there. Oop. Couple more, get a little weight there. Primers on the floor, story of my life. Okay, so I'm going to try to kind of simulate the action of this system. As this comes back, a primer will get loaded, and if it comes back all the way flush, per my previous demo, there is still some air behind the primer that perhaps a second primer could sneak in, but it's still quite a ways from actually being able to sneak a second primer into this area. There's just not enough room. One thing that I did notice, well, okay, going back to what has been changed about this new slider. This is, again, this new rectangular cutout at the tip of this slider. Again, it's not clear to me what function that serves. But let's go ahead and slide this down as if we're going to insert, the press is trying to insert a primer onto the pin. As I push it, it almost, in fact, it is catching just a little bit right there. There's just not quite enough span between this edge of the slider and this protrusion in the carrier. That distance across there is just slightly less than the width of the small primer. So in reality, this is going to be not as smooth as the prior Gen 3 system. It catches right there. I have to actually force it just a little bit and then it slips in. So I'm a little concerned if this is actually going to be a smooth operating system. Maybe it just needs a little bit of wear. And we'll show that again. So, primer slider comes back, slider moves in. Even if we go all the way flush, there's probably no chance of a double feed, but as it wears, that possibility still can exist. Hence the mod on my previous video about preventing rearward travel this slider. But then as we move this forward, we have a slight catch and then the primer drops in. So I think by and large this change is probably okay. It's probably not bad, but again, I don't really understand how this really improves things compared to the prior revision of this, just the regular Gen 3. Once again, maybe someone can help me try to understand what this new cutout in this slider is for, what that accomplishes. It's just not clear to me what that does. But there you go. That's the Gen 3 Plus, at least in its current form. If you have any questions, make sure and ask me on Loadmaster forums. I'm RJ Bishop, and look forward to putting out some more videos on the Loadmaster. I've got some, let's see, we've done some work on case sliders, the automatic case feeder. I've got that working real well, even for 223. And I've got the press actually working pretty well.